Okay, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the New Year's Indie Book Blitz and a special one-to-one indie author live chat with the Andy Peloquin.
I get a the
The
before my name.
the
I
exactly.
have arrived as an author.
Andy writes so many great different genres. Like I was going through, and you've got some military fiction, you've got your science fantasy-ish fiction, and then you've got your dark fantasy, which is what I discovered you as a reader of. And if you are watching and you don't know who Andy is, you've never read Andy's books, the links to those are in the description box. But Andy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of how you got into all these different flavors of writing?
Sure. So I've been a diehard reader since I could remember. One of my earliest happy memories is just devouring the entire Sherlock Holmes collections over a weekend. And from there, I was just kind of hooked on reading. I got into fantasy. I went Sherlock Holmes, Tarzan, John Carter of Mars, Conan the Barbarian, and I've never looked back since. And there was a time in my mid-20s where I was like, you know what? I'm pretty sure I could write something. I did. It was not great, but then I worked at it and worked at it and worked at it until was born the book that would eventually become Dark Blade Assassin, the whole series. So I've been writing for 8 years, or I've been published for 9 years now, writing for 10. And in the last 5 years, I have published about 40 some books to the point where I actually forgot. Like I have to mentally count how many books I've written and published because it is that many. I don't say that to brag. It's just I just have a lot of time to sit down and write, and I type fast, and I love telling stories. So that's kind of me. Everything you need to know.
It's great. And I was telling Andy before we went live that about a year or so ago, I was working with CL Cannon, who's going to be coming on a different panel over the Blitz. And Courtney was just like, so who would be your comp authors? Which audiences do you think would enjoy your book? And Andy was the first name that came to my head. And she was like, Andy's indie? And I was like, no, because Andy, as humble as you are, you're an award-winning author. You're a best-selling author. Did that sneak up on you, or was like there a lot of heavy marketing involved, or how did that work?
I will say that I've been very intentional about a lot of the things that I do. So the way that I've worked on recovering my books, like putting new covers, improving things, all of that. The whole award-winning thing, that is absolutely, there's as much as you'd love to say, yes, that book is definitely going to win an award. All you can do is hope, cross your fingers and hope. So I will say that I have been extremely fortunate to have stumbled onto a story or stories that people love. That's the best I can say. I've just found a character or a number of characters that people were like, I see you, or feel seen through that story. And that's really what drives me as an author, is to just keep making these connections to people through the stories that I tell.
Yes, that's great. And so tying into an earlier panel, we were talking earlier today with some authors from all different levels of the writing journey, just published their first book to been publishing 10 years. And
Wow.
One of the things they were all saying is that really indie is you taking on two different aspects of your life. You've got the creative aspect where you're writing and drafting and revising. And then you've got the other aspect, which is business, really, marketing and all of that. Which one is easier for you?
Ooh, that is a good question. I would say both have their share of impossibilities and challenges. As a creator, as an artist, it's always challenging myself to try to write I'm going to say a more honest, genuine human story. Like that for me is what drives me to keep writing another book and another book, because it's like, okay, I've explored this. Now let's go and do this. Let's talk about that. Let's look at that and discover something new in my own life, or as it pertains to my life or the lives of others around me through this story.
Mm-hmm.
That is an eternal challenge that I think will continue to make writing a difficult thing, a challenge until the day that I die, but it's also the most rewarding part of the creative process. The business side of things, the challenge is that the market is always changing. You always have to be seeing what's coming up next, what's happening now, what was done and is no longer done, or what is evergreen. Like it's two diametrically opposite industries, and yet somehow you have to try to figure out both. With I have zero schooling or education in either, so it's a delightful challenge.
Yeah. So how did you get into it then with, the indie side? Because with indie and traditional and the quality of your work, what made you decide to go this route instead of like pitching?
So I did originally pitch a couple of my projects to publishers, and I got good responses. But the one thing that I noticed was that in the time it took for me to get a response, I had written another book or two more books or three more books. So I was like, okay, I can write a lot faster than publishers can publish. Like in the amount of time that it takes me, like a publisher will take, let's say, from the moment the book gets picked up by an agent to submission to acceptance, to publishing, it's like 12 to 18 months. Mm-hmm. In that time, I can write an entire 6-book series or two because of how hard I work and how fast I type. So I eventually realized, you know what? I'm not really happy sitting around and waiting. I could do a lot just doing it all myself. And I think that in a way that the stories that I am telling can reach people more directly. So one thing that I noticed about traditional publishers versus indie authors is that traditional publishers are always looking for something fresh and new and unique, which is amazing. There is nothing wrong with that at all. But what a lot of readers are looking for is the familiar and the comfortable and what they know, which is why my book, which has real, tones of the Punisher or the Night Angel or, Artemis Entreria or Assassin's Creed, people love that because it's like, I got through all of these and I want something more. And publishers aren't coming out with that because, hey, there was just a Brent Weeks book last year or this year. And so we don't want anything more like that. So it's a totally different market. And it's exciting to play in the realm of indie because it's like, what do people want? What will people want? How can I give it to you and make my own spin on it?
That's great. With so many different twists as far as like genres that you write in, do you write them all at once? Like, here's this whole series, I'm going to write it till it's done, and then I start a different series? Or are you jumping between these very different feelings, these different worlds?
Historically, I have done just one series because I tend to be a very, one horse writer kind of guy. I'm going to write the series as hard as I can until it's done, and then I'll release it all. But with the Darkblade series specifically, the books are so long that it takes so much time between the books to write them and to release them. So I've actually had to sort of mix things up where I write one. So I went between the Darkblade series and the Dragonblood Assassin series. And now I'm still working on Darkblade, but I'm also going to be working on another series in the interim. So it's kind of, I much prefer to go with just one, but sometimes, necessity dictates that you work on two.
Right. Do you have one series that's easier to write than another for you?
I think the characters in Darkblade, they just come so much more naturally to me because they're so heavily based off of, in many ways, my own life. As an example, where the hunter is at, the main character, he's at in his journey in book 8, which I'm working on right now, he's shifted away from, loner assassin, and he's become sort of a father figure, which is very, mirroring my own journey as a father to young adults. What do they want from me in their lives? What role do I serve? What do I need? And what do they need from me? And then writing that into this story, exploring that through the character. Obviously, it's a great, grand, bloody, violent adventure, which is always so much fun to write. But at the end of the day, it's those quiet moments where you really get a sense of the character. And I think that for me helps me to understand and connect with the hunter a lot more than, say, other characters, which are maybe less directly linked to my own life.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great point. That I think we always put a little bit of ourselves in all of our books, but the degree that you put yourself into the books can be very different. Because you've got very different, like a very wide range of characters across your series. And I'm actually wondering how you keep all of their voices straight. That was going to be my question for if you're skipping between these, how do you go from, the Darkblade series to your other series and not carry over some of that tone between the characters?
I'm going to say all I can do is my best because it is so hard to like not write. I've actually made the mistake in what my co-author Jamie Castle in the last Dragon Blood Assassin book. He's like, really? And he sent me a passage where I had written the hunter instead of the main character. I said, well, crap. But that's, it's kind of like, all right, you finish a book, you take a step back, you take a few days or a week off to kind of, plan what comes next, to kind of refresh on what you were working on before, so that when you sit down, you're trying to come at it kind of with a fresh mindset. But at the same time, you've just spent 2 or 3 months working on another book, so you are deeply, deeply in that character's head, or at least I am. So it does take a bit of time for me to be like, all right, let's snap out of this. Let's get into this new gear. It's a challenge. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it's like being an actor in real life for all these different people.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
There are some people who have, who are just born with the brain for that. My friend Josiah, JDL Roselle, he's just bouncing, he'll do a chapter here and a chapter there every day because it interests him to tell these different stories. For me, it's like, look, I want one thing and focus on that and just really deep dive into it, sink my teeth into it. But some people have a brain made for that, and I kind of envy that sometimes.
Yeah, JDL's doing really good these days too with the recent contest news and everything. It's been an exciting year for indie.
Yeah.
And that brings me to a really interesting point. Something that you've really invested a lot of time in is the Indie Fantasy Addicts Facebook group. For people who were on yesterday, you met Rachel, who is also an admin in that group. I'm just going to stick it up down here. But the Indie Fantasy Addict group is a very large group of readers and also writers who read, but not promo-y or anything like that. It's readers getting together to read and share honest reviews in a safe place that are all for indie books. So with all the writing you do and everything else you're keeping straight, you still manage to both read and oh, I'm sorry, John, I'll put it back up. It's facebook.com/groups/indie fantasy addicts with an S on the end. How did you manage?
It is a juggling act that I'm pretty sure I'm not quite as good at as I should be, but it's kind of, so I'm pretty organized in the sense that my day is divided into basically 2-hour writing shifts. So from 7 to 9, I'm writing, from 10 to noon, and 2 to 4. Those are kind of my writing shifts. The rest of the, lunch and breakfast and duties around there, they kind of exist around the writing shifts. But as long as I have those times carved out for chapters, anything else that I can do around that, I can fill in times here and there. So I typically tend to use the extra times, or like, let's say I write a chapter in an hour and a half instead of 2 hours. Hooray, that's an extra half hour to dedicate to, keeping social media on track and things like that. So it's kind of like you have time for what you make time for, and Indie Fantasy Addicts is something that I've made time for because it's really created the community of readers that I wanted. When I first joined Facebook, everything was really promo-y and really just, buy my book. I hated that. I stopped going. I think I've joined and ignored easily 100 groups because it sort of devolved into that. But then when I joined Indie Fantasy Addicts, I don't even remember how long I've been there. It's literally part of my day at this point. When I joined there, the admins were so intent on keeping it a place for readers to hang out, like a really reader-centric group. I was like, this is what I like. So when the opportunity arose for me to become an admin and help keep it on track, I was like, oh, I'm so in, because I wanted to keep it. I wanted to keep it like that. I want somewhere where I can go and say, guys, I loved this book that I just discovered. Let's talk about it. And it wasn't, hey, this is my book. I just wrote it. Read it. Because that gets boring very, very quickly when every author around, and there are so many of us, are doing that. But if it's like, hey, this other author that I just discovered tells an amazing story, let's get fanatics about that. That for me as a reader is so much more exciting than, trying to just market my books.
Absolutely. Yes, I completely agree. And I think that's a friend of mine recommended me to Indie Fantasy Addicts last year. And I remember joining under my regular name, not my author name. It's here because I just wanted a safe space to just be a reader.
Yeah.
And Love that. So if you're a writer, but you also want to find really good fantasy books, I recommend checking out the Facebook group. Don't bring your promos with you. Leave those at the door, but you can come in here
Yeah.
and
As the all-powerful rule enforcer, I will enforce the rules on you. That's my role. If anybody breaks the rules, they send me to hunt them down.
the rule dragon.
Exactly. I wield the ban hammer. But no, for any readers who want a great place to hang out, whether you're an author first or reader first, but just bring your reader, persona, have fun, find some awesome books, find people to bond with. It's going to be a great time.
Absolutely. And so that leads me to the question of, I've heard a lot on panels from readers asking how writers are able to write if they read. Because I think there's this perception that, if you read a lot, you're going to start sounding like who you read instead of having your own voice.
It is very true. I will say that I've noticed that when I am reading something, especially a book that really, really, that is very engaging. So as an example, I just finished reading Jay Kristoff's Empire of the Vampire.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just sucked in because not so much, the story was great, but it was the tone of voice. This character had such a strong voice that I was like, I want to find out more about what made this character so cynical and bitter that he sounds like this. And this is the hallmark of a great book. So there is this thing where I noticed that as I was reading Empire of the Vampire, my character became a little more sarcastic. The story became a little darker, but that's okay. Because at the end of the day, we are the sum of our experiences. So if my character, the story needs a little bit of that at the time, that's what it needs. If it changes the flavor of the story slightly, so be it. It makes a story that's far more unique than it was had I just read Lord of the Rings over and over and over again, 100 times. So I strongly encourage people, do that. Read different things. So for example, when I'm writing sci-fi, sometimes I'll dive into a bit more sci-fi because I want to get a sense of what it is about the tone of voice or the characters that people love about sci-fi. If I'm writing military fantasy, I'll read a little bit more military fantasy and kind of take from that. Maybe I'll take some of the way that the battle scenes are expressed, or I'll take away that, the world is developed over the battlefield, how the characters view everything, or just kind of take on different flavors. And the truth is that is an excellent way to expand your horizons as an author. And if you become a little bit infected by someone else's voice, as long as you're not directly ripping them off, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. I encourage it, in fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I feel like reading a variety of books makes my writing stronger because I start to pick up on things that I'm like, that is actually a really well-worded way to express that, or this way that breaking up their paragraphs really works for me. And the more I read, the better and better it gets. And
yeah, it all goes into the melange, the witch's brew that is your writing style, in the sense that as a writer, you will always change based on everything around you. You're going through a tough time, your writing might get darker, or it might get brighter because you need that happy escape. You're deeply in love, you might be like, oh my God, I want to write this romance into my life, or I'm getting tons of romance away from the computer, so let's go and write a super gritty, no romance story. It's all about who you are and how your life affects your creative process. And so reading does that too, in a way. I was exposed to romantic fantasy in a big way this year for the first time. I'd read, here and there, but I made a conscious effort to read more. And I was blown away by certain elements of romantic fantasy that you don't encounter in the more epic fantasy. So I'm like, I love this. I want to bring a bit of this into my own writing. So maybe the stories that I wrote this year had a little bit more romance in them, but so what? That is part of what makes the entire series or the entire, author journey so exciting.
yes. And you have the creative control being indie to not have a publisher come back and go, nope, there wasn't romance in the first one, so we don't want the romance in this one.
Exactly. And this is what I love about being indie, is that a lot of what I want to do as a writer is what I love as a reader. So if I love it And I mean, using Empire of the Vampire as an example, millions of other people loved it. What's wrong with doing the same thing? In fact, let's do the same thing my own way, but try to, tap into what makes it. And I think that's an advantage that as indies we have over traditionally published authors, is that we can get away with doing the same thing or similar, and we don't have anybody to tell us, no, it's too similar to that. Readers are going to be like, you know what? I love this. Give me more of that. And they'll fall in love with your unique voice. And again, as I love to say, you can give two authors the exact same character, the exact same story and backstory. 500 words in, it will be a drastically diverging story. No two authors can tell the same story. So it's just like, we're going to start from the same point. I love talking about how my Hunter character is like Durzo Blint meets the Punisher with a little bit of John Wick thrown in. And if you sit down and read his opening chapter, you'll be like, oh, John Wick, oh, the Punisher. 2 chapters in, immediately a totally different character. It starts from the same place, but it ends up going to drastically different places.
Mm-hmm. Right. So coming up in 2024, there's usually a anthology that comes out by some authors from the IFA group. Are you contributing a story this year?
I don't know. That is an excellent question. It depends entirely on whether I have the time, which is always a big question, because Darkblade books end up being 200,000 words plus. So that's, 3 months of my life, each book. If I have a story that I want to tell, I am not the kind of person just to write a story for the sake of writing a story. I need it to matter to me. Mm-hmm. I like connecting things to my world and my characters. So the story has to matter for the character in question. So I want to say tentatively yes, but unless something, unless I have a hole in my schedule and a perfect story idea comes along and, everything falls into place, I can't say for certain.
Got it. But we can expect some books from you, though, in 2024.
Absolutely. So in 2024, I have the Kickstarter for my Queen of Thieves, the second book in the series. And in that, I just finished work on a novel. It was supposed to be a novella, but as fate wanted, it is now a 70,000 word novel. That ties book 1 and 2 together. And then I have another novella that's coming out in an anthology in 2024 that is also between books 1 and 2 of that one. So there's those. And then I've got Darkblade 8 coming out in the beginning of the year. I'll definitely have Darkblade 9 before, I'm hoping mid-year, the third quarter of the year at the latest. Mm-hmm. And then I am working on at least 2 other projects unrelated to Darkblade and my existing world, but things that are very exciting for me as a creator and hopefully exciting for readers, because these are really, really fun story ideas that I have fallen in love with. I mean, that's why I'm working on them, right?
Right. Yeah, super, super excited. If you're watching and you want to follow Andy for all the news, the links are in the description box again. So you can follow Andy, you can take a look at the books, get started reading to catch up by the time new ones come out in 2024. But Andy, the last question I really have is, there are so many different kinds of books that you've written that if you were going to tell someone, hey, I'm Andy, I write this book, I think this is the one that you should read to get to know my writing style the best, which one would it be?
It has to be Darkblade. Like Queen of Thieves, I am still blown away that my brain created this character and told this story. I still have a very hard time believing that I am capable of writing a character this amazing. Heirs of Destiny is a delightful action-adventure young adult series. The Silent Champions, I love a good military story. Like, you give me battles, you give me, soldiers, I am there all day long. So that was, it's just a delightful series to have written and to read. But Darkblade is the series that is most me, I would say, because the character, again, this was the first book that I wrote. So I had no idea what I was doing beyond I want to tell an awesome story. But so much of who I was as a person then, and even who I am to varying degrees now, went into this character, a character who is an outsider, who's a loner, who is disconnected from the world around him because he feels and is different. And that is like a mirror to my journey. And over the course of the Darkblade series, he continues to make more connections with the people in his life, and he starts building his own little family and his friends and his allies. And again, that's a mirror of my own journey as my diagnosis with Asperger's, and just coming to terms with who I was. And so basically the Darkblade series has mirrored my own life. Obviously, I'm not an assassin. I don't kill lots and lots of people like this. But the human underneath the blood and the guts and all of that, that is who I am as a person. So I tell people the best way to get to know me is just to read Darkblade.
Wow. That's really powerful.
It's the introduction to my world too. It's the first book I wrote, so it introduces the gods, it introduces the sort of the dark flavor of everything, and sets up a lot of behind the scenes details that kind of pop up in all the other series, and everything is connected, but it's all connected through Darkblade.
Wow. And I highly, highly recommend Darkblade personally. 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely think that would be a great one to start with. So just
Thank
be
you.
ready,
I appreciate the recommendation.
Still coming out. So.
Yeah, at this point, it's looking like it's going to be 15 books.
Oh, we've got just.
Hey, Chris, good to see you.
Yeah, and then John. Cover is nice.
Thank you. I put a lot of time and effort into making the Darkblade cover like the most assassin-y I could. Like I said, I wanted to make something that was there for people who love Artemis Entreri and Dritz from the Icewind Dale books and Night Angel. That was a series that inspired me to write. I got to the end of Night Angel and there was going to be no more Durzo Blint, and I was like, I'm making my own. That is my evolution as an author, essentially.
Writing what you're missing.
Exactly. And so I researched all of the cool looking assassin covers that I could find. And I had an artist that had done the 12 covers for my sci-fi series, 13 covers for my sci-fi series. And I told him, listen, here are 6 amazing assassin covers. Do this, but better. And this is what he did.
Wow. Yeah, I love that cover. And I love that despite being dark, it's got the light in it that really makes it stand out if it's on the shelf with other dark books. But
it is very, very possibly the closest thing to a perfect cover that I could have asked for.
It's like, is it the fave of all your covers?
It isn't because I don't know if you've seen, I'll just show you. The newest, the artist who did the Queen of Thieves book, he just did such an amazing job. It's really jammed in there. He did such an amazing job with this piece of art. Like, this is a piece of artwork that I will forever love. It is, the motion is so dynamic. The color contrast is just amazing. This is probably the piece of art that I love the most. But the one that is most like perfect for the series is Darkblade.
Right. Yep. Good. That's a good point too. You can have beautiful covers. And I redid one of my covers this year, because as much as I love that cover to my heart and soul, it wasn't picking up the right audience. And it was picking up like a YA fantasy romance audience. And then they were extremely disappointed when it was not YA. There was only a romantic subplot and a bittersweet ending. It's like, this is not what we got. I was like,
oh, no,
it was YA. So I had to redo the book. And with the new cover, it evokes those emotions like you were talking about, much more on point. And I got a professional who gave me some advice, like, hey, this is the genre you want. This is the style. This is the look. And that's something that I was like, man, I wish I'd known that years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have learned over the course of my 8 years of publishing, 10 years of writing, is that a cover is worth its weight in gold. That and a professional editor. Those two things, you can be an okay writer. And if you have a great cover and a great editor, you can succeed at this. But yeah, no, a book cover. I have actually stopped reading book blurbs in the last 6 months or so, because I want to fall in love with the cover. I want to fall in love with maybe a title or review that another friend has, but I don't want to know anything about the book, so it can be like a brand new discovery. But the cover is something that I will always look at, and a great cover is more likely to get me to buy a book sight unseen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally guilty of buying books sight unseen.
Yep.
And usually it works out great. So
it's a lovely thing. I have actually only DNF'd, which is do not finish. I've only DNF'd 3 books this year.
Nice.
I've gotten very, very fortunate, including I read so many books in the Indie Fantasy Addict Summer Reading Challenge. And I had so many lovely discoveries of authors that I'm looking forward to diving more into their work, because I just found beautiful covers. And I was like, if an author has the time and the care and the money, let's be honest, to invest in a beautiful cover, the book is more likely to be well done too.
That's true. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for everything, for being on during the middle of the Blitz and the holiday. This is so much fun having you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute blast.
Thank you again. Thank you all for joining. If you want to meet more indie authors, there are more coming. We are going to keep doing Blitz lives today. I think there's 4 or 5 more lives today, and then Blitz lives tomorrow and Monday. So subscribe so you don't miss them, and check out Andy's books. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.